Hello and welcome to Debating Europe's online citizens panel about trust in politics. My name is Joe Lidobarski and I'm the editor of Debating Europe, and I'm joined today by Damian Bosalaga, who is a member of the European Parliament and co-founder of the Pan-European party Volt. We also have a panel of 5 European citizens joining us, and over the next 30 minutes, they're going to be putting their questions to Damian about restoring trust in politics. So we don't have a lot of time for the debate, and I want to dive straight into it to give as much time as possible to our citizens. Let's kick things off on this topic, trust in politics, with Ariadna, who's going to ask the first question to get the debate started. Ariadna, over to you.
There has been a lot of debate about this on the last years, but do you think the European election system is fair, or if it needs to be remade? In case that it will need a remake, what what approach will you recommend?
This is an excellent question. And also just to remind everyone in terms of some of the sort of ideas that have been floated around, we've had the Spitzenkandidaten system, we've had questions of European, pan-European lists and so on, all these different ideas. Damian, what would you say to Ariadna?
Yeah, so in my movement, we discussed this a lot. We said like, okay, we are all about EU reform. We want to improve the EU so that it gets, to become a real parliamentary democracy, if you want. So where the parliament is actually at the core of everything, where the parliament has the right, or parliamentarians have the right to initiate laws, and where in the end, the government, the executive is also responsible towards and accountable towards parliament because they're actually electing them, or the majority of parliament elects them. And now to get to your precise question, so how should these parliamentarians that we vote in be elected, and how would the whole system work in my best view? I do have to say, I quite like the idea that you take the best of all systems, which means you take the best of the first past the post system for a local vote, that the person who you're voting for and that you have a strong connection to that person, that because they got the majority wherever they are. And if you had a second vote and that vote would be somehow for a certain party family. And there are different discussions you can have, and you could have one where you actually vote with a second vote for a European party. That is the idea of a transnational list. You could have it more complex, saying that the second vote actually says how much the proportion of the parliament, how much EU party will be represented, which is a bit the German system. Or you just say the second vote is for something like a transnational list. But I think what's absolutely clear is 2 things when we think about the design. One is that MEPs, so members of the European Parliament, are closer to citizens, so that people actually know who they're voting for, who exactly it is they can talk to. And the second thing is that we don't talk about national issues so much, but that we get more connected to the European debate. So do we want more austerity or more investment? Do we want a restrictive or an open migrant and refugee system? Do we, these are the things that we should be discussing in these elections, and then we should also get what we are discussing. And so therefore, I think it's important to have both the local connection, but also the European debate in a way.
Ariadna, before I move on, can I ask what sort of changes you might want to see to the European election system? Have you got kind of a personal preference?
I am no expert by any means, but I have lived in several European countries. I have lived so far in 6 different European countries. I've voted in every single election that I've been able to vote. European election and also national elections in my country, in Spain. And what I've noticed is that there is a strong difference depending on where you're voting. So there's a national system for voting to the European Parliament. And also I've noticed that both conscience, so being aware that there is an election going on, depends a lot on when you are in Europe. And I do not see no offense, but I do not see the parliament or the European institutions doing a lot at the national level, or doing as much as they should in certain national countries. For example, in Hungary, it's non-existent, the awareness that you can vote and how to vote in an European election. And also, I am always a bit confused about the Euro groups, so the groups in the parliament that I can vote for, the Euro parties, as they are not sui generis. I mean, they are not themselves. They are a combination of other parties. So you need to study a lot who's in there. And I just understand that this is a bit too complicated for everyday citizens. So
Damian, can I maybe have you come back? I want to move on to others, but Damian, can I just have you respond very quickly to this? Because I know that Volta, your kind of own experience in terms of running in lots of different, the plan was originally to run candidates in every single EU member state, right? And there were difficulties in doing that in terms of registering in different member states and so on. So, maybe you could just respond to kind of Ariadne's comment there.
For sure. I mean, you have summarized it better than I could, like the issue is that we vote for national parties and they then somehow go to the European Parliament and then they join like some European party coalition, whatever. But you never vote actually for these European parties. And funnily, that is exactly the reason why we built this party that I'm a part of, Volt, which is supposed to be a European party. So it's the same name, the same logo, the same values, and hopefully at some point also the same European group in the parliament. And so it's actually, you could vote for Volt in the local elections in Spain and in Hungary if you wanted to, and you could also vote for Volt for the European elections, so that you have this connection. Because I fully agree, people don't actually know, what is the EPP, like the European People's Party, that is the conservative party within the European Parliament. Most people don't know about Parliament, as you said, and they don't know about parliamentary elections. And it's just because the connection is so far away. And I think it's not always Parliament's fault. I think it's really a bit of a systematic issue that we need to solve about building European parties, about actually having these European campaigns on topics, so that, when there's a financial crisis, as I said, we can vote for either a more social democrat direction or a more conservative direction. We should be, as citizens, have the feeling, I vote for a direction and that direction actually happens. And that is currently not the case in the way it's set up.
Let's move to Margaret. You have a question, please. Could you maybe introduce yourself and pose your question to Damian?
Yes, hello, I'm Margaret from Estonia, and my question is, how should politicians use social media to gain trust of the people? It's a great platform to share information, but is it trustworthy, or how should they use it to gain trust of the people?
I think this is an excellent question. Damian, what would you say to Margaret?
So I very often I wonder how they shouldn't use it, like more the opposite. And there I have many examples, not only from Europe, but that's another story. But I don't know. I think probably trying to not fall into the trap that negative posts get shared 2 times or 3 times more often than positive ones is a good thing. Maybe then you have to tweet 4 times more positive things, but then do it, like I think that's a bit, and that I can see that also for myself. I really need to remind myself that I want to send a positive, constructive message and not fall into this shaming and blaming kind of direction. And the other thing is, and that's also something that I'm trying, a year ago, I wasn't in the European Parliament, and 3 years ago, I didn't think much about politics apart from reading it in the newspaper. So for me, I have still quite an immediate past where I didn't identify myself as a politician. But obviously that will change now with time. And so for me, it's important to, not start talking like a politician completely, but actually to talk like I would normally talk. If we would have a beer or coffee or something, I wouldn't be saying like, so the multi-annual financial framework has, like who gives a damn? So that kind of immediate contact, I think, is something that I'm trying to maintain and not so much fall into the lingua of politics. I think lingua is already a term used in politics too much. So
we started Debating Europe in around 2011, and I've been working in kind of EU social media since 2008. I remember when Twitter first came in, and the promise of social media was exactly as you say. Politicians you're going to be able to interact directly with politicians. It's going to be possible for voters to speak, one-on-one with the politicians and get rid of all of the bullshit, if you'll excuse my French. We've seen in the last few years that kind of promise has been complicated by things like, micro targeting of advertising and so on. And frankly, as you say, some politicians should probably have their social media accounts taken away from them. So do you think that social media has kind of lived up to the promise? Maybe it's a bit of a darker reality than initially those in 2008 that we were all kind of talking how great it would be.
I don't know. I mean, many of the MEP colleagues that I have, we all range in the 10,000, range of followerships, and it's mostly the people that we would anyways talk to. So I think for me, it's really useful to talk to the people who are really interested in what I'm doing, and that works quite well. And then I have a bit of a resonance, and they follow a bit what's going on. And I will always try to keep that up. But I think what I'm much more interested in, and that is a bit harder on social media, or at least it's only possible with a good product, if you want a good narrative, is to actually go out there, to go through that kind of bubble that you create around yourself, which doesn't necessarily have to be an EU bubble, but just like, I think, it's cool that when I meet my friends, they tell me, I saw that you were like in Greece and talked to the migration minister there. It's like, yeah, but like, who else realized that I did? I think it would be interesting to talk about European politics way beyond the social media bubble that I created around myself. But I still see it as my responsibility to do my job well and to tell people in entertaining ways what I'm doing, and I try to do that via Instagram as well, so that there's a bit more of an immediate reaction or immediate way to see how it is for a new politician to join, to be part of this weird system. But I think it can always be done better, and we just need to be aware of the negative things around it.
Let's move to the next question from Jose. Jose, could you introduce yourself and ask your question?
Hello, thank you. I'm Jose, I'm from Spain, but currently living in Belgium. So my question is if it has ever been a situation in history where people have trusted their politicians, and if so, what can we learn from this time?
Okay, I love this question because it kind of subtly undermines the entire premise of this debate, which is that trust in politicians has been going down over time. Of course, we have Eurobarometer polling, which says actually trust in politics has kind of bumped around 40-30% for a while. Trust in European institutions is often higher than trust in national institutions. When we say, how can we restore trust in politicians, we're assuming that trust is going down. So what would you say to Jose and his question, have people ever trusted politicians?
So first, there is an historic element to it, which I have a hard time assessing because I'm not a historian. And as I said, I'm quite new to politics. But I think there are individual examples, and also today there are individual examples where people trust politicians. And I think what I see is that that's the first point. The second point is that since the 1980s, party membership has decreased, as it has halved in Europe. So people don't actually identify with the political parties anymore. And for myself as well, like the word Partei, like party in German, it sounds so uncool. Like it's really like the worst kind of thing you can think of. It's like, hey, I am part of a party. Like it's just like, it just gives you a bit of a chill, and like, oh God, these old people that I don't know, just has no, real life sexiness to it at all. Just a word, or politician or something. So I think there is an issue there, but especially because parties put up lists, and lists get elected, and there's currently in most of our systems, there's no way around that. So these are the people that will then decide about the big societal questions of our time. So you can think it's dumb, you can think it's like unsexy, but it's still how our system works. And that's, when we were discussing and saying Marine Le Pen is rising, the AfD in Germany is getting strong, all these right-wing populists are coming in. The first thing we thought about was like, let's build another think tank, let's build a movement that sits on the streets and says we want to change. But we only late on, I would say, said actually the issue is in political parties. It's in the way how, in politics, it's not around politics. There's also many issues, but like the issue is really in politics. So like, if you want to tackle the issue, then you have to go into party politics. So I think to come back to your question, we shouldn't, fall back into this negative thinking of, politics never got any trust. Who cares? If it's low, it doesn't matter. I think it matters a lot. And I think we should always try to fight that, because this is exactly why at the moment people are looking more towards autocrats and how fast they can react, how fast China was able to react to the corona crisis. And so I think this is really dangerous, and it will have negative and actual suffering consequences for people, especially minorities, especially the weaker ones in society. So I do believe we should go all into these unsexy political parties and make them sexy again.
Jose, I see that you're a student. I don't know if you're a student of history or of politics. Do you, like, if I put your own question to you, do you think, can you think of a time when people trusted politicians and something that we could learn from that?
No, not really, because I'm just a student of biotechnology. So, but could I just like do a follow-up question?
Yes.
So you have been talking about how parties are unsexy, and I do think that maybe some people are just not trusting the current political system because your ideas are not represented perfectly by one party. So do you think maybe like a way of gaining trust on people would be to more like forwarding like new systems in which it's currently like totally changed? Like, for example, people don't vote for parties or for people, but they just vote for ideas?
That's a really interesting question. What would you say?
Yeah, so that's a tough one. Yeah, so we in our movement we have 6 pillars that basically show our political direction, and one of them is citizen participation. So we have been discussing a lot about what kind of ways to participate make sense. But also, given the Brexit experience, I'm not such a big fan of direct democracy. Really saying everything needs to be discussed with referenda. And liquid democracy can sometimes go a bit in this direction, where you say, look, you just pose a question and people can just vote on it. And then I, as a representative, will just do whatever the majority of these people say. I really don't think it makes sense. Also, because I'm currently working, for example, on, let's take the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which is the 750 billion euro fund that should supposedly help us out of the Corona crisis. There's most of the money is given via this thing that I'm working on, this instrument. Now, look, if I tell people whether the tracking should be done by the taxonomy regulation, what would you vote? Then you need to inform yourself first about what is this actually about? How does the system work? How can you, what's tracking? What does green spending mean? This is my full-time job and I'm paid to do it. And for me to try to pass all of this onto you and to ask you to take an informed decision about that, I think is extremely difficult. And for me, sensible participation is about informed participation. And therefore, I'm a big fan of citizen participation and, for example, citizen assemblies on crucial issues that are really important for society, where people have the time to inform themselves, where they are informed, where they're paid for a couple of days to leave their job so that they can actually go even though they don't have a huge income, and where they get trained and where they then debate and then they go out and maybe then they can vote on a direction that should be taken. But I don't believe that we can take all political decisions directly, but I think we need a representative democracy where people trust the people that they're electing, that they will do a good job,
That's a very interesting topic. I'm conscious of the time and I don't want to run out of time. So I'm going to move on to Nele, who also has a question. Nele, if you could introduce yourself and your question.
So hi, Damien. We have quite a similar trajectory. For the last year, I've also came a lot in contact with the European Union, and I've seen the possibility to make a positive impact. And as an engineer, I'm quite engaged in climate change, and I'm actually curious what is actually the best way to start expressing myself politically and create a shift myself as a young urban worker.
Okay, this follows on quite nicely, I think, from Jose's question, which is about, you have this idea, you want to get it kind of enacted into policy. How do you actually do that within the democratic system? So Damian, what would you say?
So I give you the example of what we did. We built a movement that has 2 main pillars, or like 2 main pillars. I used the word before, so let's leave that away. But 2 main angles. Yeah, one is the movement angle, where we try to be a bit more on the activist side and be on the streets and try to do more like actual campaigns or, and more NGO work if you want. And then we have the party angle, which is, how we get people elected because we believe we can do change via the more the party politics kind of representative system elections. And I think these two ways are also open to you. You can decide, I want to be the one on the street building pressure. I will organize Fridays for Future in my local village or whatever. And I'll try to always team up with many others so that my voice is loud, because alone our voices are often not that loud. But if we gather more people around us, that's always helpful and will make our voice louder. And then you pressure the political system to listen to you, and that helps, because if somebody pushes from the outside, it's easier to pull from the inside. Or you say, look, it's not enough for me. I do want to go into political parties. I do want to also work on programs, or maybe even, which would be even cooler because you're a woman and there's a lack of women in politics, you say, look, I'm going to go and run for just this small local elections where I can work on circular economy in my urban setting. Or you say, I want to, actually try do national and European politics. And obviously our movement would be very happy if you come, but there is so many cool stuff out there where you can do, exactly this question of climate, or where you can tackle the question of climate change.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you.
I'm going to move on to the last question, which is from Sebastian, and we might have a little bit of time for a sort of general debate afterwards. So let's first of all go, though, to the question from Sebastian.
Good afternoon. My name is Sebastian. I'm a 20 years old Romanian student in Brussels. And my question for you is where you think introducing neutral political education in high schools will bring new generations who have trust in politics. And my reasoning is that people tend to fear the unknown. So if they're not taught anything about politics, then of course they will not trust it.
This is this question about civic education classes and so on. What do you think about this, Damian?
I think I remember how in school they tried to teach us stuff, and I just didn't listen so much, but that's more me personally. I just didn't listen for quite a long time until my brain developed enough to understand what's going on. So I think very simply put, both history, and then we come back to Jose, as well as like civic education on politics, and even potentially the need to do a political internship during your school or something like that, I think would be extremely useful. Because many of us, especially I think many of us have lost the idea that big societal questions should be tackled via politics. I mean, it's literally the system we've built to tackle societal questions. And suddenly, somehow, when we think about, climate change, or if we think about migration, or any issue, we turn somewhere else. We turn to movements, and I told you why they're important. But or foundations or something, but we never actually go to the place which was originally designed to solve these issues. So I think to learn that early in school, and to do and to experience that firsthand, how that works and what the difficulties are with compromises and so on, I think would be extremely cool. And especially, you being from Romania and now living in a different system in Belgium, or a different country and different cultural setting, I think, to do that in a way that encompasses all of Europe would make sense. Yeah, that we actually understand that we are part of a European package, of a European family, to an extent. I think it would be really cool.
I think this, you talked in your answer there just about the kind of learning about the difficulties of compromise. And I think that is maybe a really key kind of question. It's something which sort of comes out of Jose's question. Jose's question was about, okay, so people are frustrated with politics, with political systems, because they have ideas and they don't get enacted. There's always this compromise, and the compromise is frustration, but it's frustrating. But isn't the kind of purpose of a democratic system to mediate this kind of compromise, to encourage a compromise, which maybe raises the question, are we frustrated with politics because we have unrealistic expectations of politics? Is that the problem?
I think so. But I can give you an example what's even worse than compromise. Yeah? The opposite of compromise is, obviously in some systems it is extremist positions that don't consider the other side. But in our system, in the European Union, the opposite of compromise is inaction. And I think inaction is extremely dangerous and delegitimizes our system completely. So As I said, I work on migration and asylum. The issue here is that the EU is built in a way that if our interior ministers don't agree all on a certain, new system for asylum in Europe, they can all veto it. And that is the one big mistake that we did when or let's say it's more like a growth pain that we need to overcome, because at its heart and some crucial issues, the EU is still intergovernmental. And that brings me back to, Jose, your history. That's intergovernmentalism is, where you have heads of state coming together, sitting there and bargaining, but not for the greater good necessarily, but actually for their own, for their own country. And this is at its core, sadly, still often the case in the EU when it comes to various delicate issues. And what you can see is, I'm sorry for being so blunt, but death and suffering following. So you have Moria, like this camp, which I actually visited a year ago and which now burned down. You have people all across the EU suffering because we didn't manage to set up a system that is humane, which doesn't mean that everybody can stay. It just means you have a system that treats people while they go through the asylum process in a humane way. That's all. That could be already something you can achieve if you had a normal system that functions with compromise. And the parliament actually managed to do that, and then the heads of state didn't. But so because the parliament works by a majority and compromise, it was able to come up with something. And because the heads of state don't function like that when it comes to very difficult issues, they didn't. And so that's why I said, we should learn about compromise. We should learn that the stronger party then probably gets more off the table because they're stronger. And we should understand that, that's why we should vote and get active, get on the street, as Nele said, for the parties that we care about and for the topics we care about, so that it shifts the compromise. But we should never, I think, believe that compromise in itself is evil. I think what's really evil is autocrat decision-making or the lack of compromise, which is inaction, which actually leads to suffering and death in some circumstances. Sorry for being so blunt.
We are, on that note, well, we're almost out of time, but we have a couple more minutes, and I just wanted to, this is putting our citizens on the spot, but do any of you have a kind of follow-up question or some reaction to anything that we've talked about today? If not, we can end it early, that's fine, but I just wonder if you just sort of put your hand up if you'd like to kind of ask a question. Sebastian, yes.
Yes, Damien, I think you said that we cannot implement direct democracy on a greater level. But don't you think that in the current era, we can use internet to help us implement direct democracy at even European level if we want to?
I would, if you talk about levels, and I would have to choose where to implement direct democracy the most, and that's also what we wrote in our program, it would be the local level, for sure. Because, if you have to decide how often do we want a circular system for our trash locally, what you're talking about, how, what the outcome will be, and you will instantly feel the outcome on yourself and will inform yourself for the next vote around to make it better. But for the European level, I'm just a bit wary of, and that connects back to the social media question, who is able to use the misinformed to steer the debate in a direction that is based on fear, that is based on just false premises, that is potentially even based on foreign interference in our system. I'm not convinced. I think there are elements of direct democracy that you can use. So, for example, when we discuss about the future of Europe, what we are trying to set up is this conference with local fora, local gatherings where people can discuss, just citizens can go and discuss and have this exchange also then at some point with politicians and so on. And yes, I do believe that we need to go back to the citizens for these questions because it's such a crucial question. What do you want the future of Europe to look like in a way? But always it needs to be organized in a way that people have the time and the chance to inform themselves, that they have the information at hand to take a decision. I have a hard time talking about issues even that I don't know about. So if you ask me about the banking union, I can try, I can try telling you what I know, but it's not a topic I work on in the European Union. So I would feel uncomfortable having to completely freely decide this or to even put it out to everyone to decide this, I think. where I mean, in my way, I can rely a bit on the discussions I have with fellow parliamentarians. But what would you do? Like if you have to vote on the banking union, I think it's a bit of a difficult question.
At least on the social level, people could be asked directly. For example, how many migrants do you want to be accepted into Europe, or things like that? On very sensitive topics, which people might get upset about if the result is not according to their personal views.
But imagine, I mean, even there, like, would you want that the majority of Europe decides for all of Europe how many asylum seekers we should take up? I mean, asylum, for example, is a law, international law. So if we vote against that, we would basically make the EU not be in line with law anymore. And also, I mean, North Rhine-Westphalia just said they want to accept 3,000 asylum seekers from the camps, like on the Greek islands. Would you now tell them, because Hungary has managed to, get more people around the table to stop them from, like, I don't know. There you already see that the simplification, I think, is not helpful, and especially in such emotional issues, I think it's not helpful.
I think this is we've opened up this is another discussion almost. We do actually have an upcoming citizens panel on European migration policy, including asylum policy and Moria, the camps in Greece and so on. So this is a topic that we're going to be addressing. However, for today we are out of time, unfortunately, so I am going to have to end it there. I do want to thank Damian Bosselager for taking part. I'm going to thank our citizens as well, Jose, Margaret, Nele, Sebastian, and Ariadne for taking the time to put your questions. And thank you at home for watching. If you want to continue the debate, we will be having more debates on this topic on our website, debatingeurope.eu. And thank you all, and have a very good rest of your day.
Thank you for the good questions.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.